Hello, everybody. This is MonteCristo, and I'm coming to you with the first ever Monte's musings about Counter-Strike Global Offensive. This is a game that I've been following for the past couple of years and really enjoying in terms of entertainment, and I wanted to make a video where I discuss why I think currently the the collective group of top level CSGO casters is the best casting unit in the three major esports of League of Legends, Dota, and Counter-Strike. And before everybody starts to get really mad and calling me salty about League of Legends or anything like that, this is not really about League of Legends, not a reaction to those casters. I've worked with many of them. I respect a lot of those casters very much that I've worked with in the past. This is more of a reaction to the CSGO community's recent temper tantrum and attack on Semler, which I found very odd because Semler is very well respected among his peers. In fact, he did win Caster of the Year for 2016 from the Esports Industry Awards. I was one of the panelists for those awards, and I myself voted for Semler. So it was quite odd to see how harsh a reception he was getting from the fans, and I think that the CSGO fans really need to reconsider their treatment of their casters, because I think that they are inordinately lucky in the fact that they actually have the best group of casters in the overall esports scene. So to get into why and how I think this developed, because if you asked me in 2015, I would not have said this was true. I would have said League of Legends probably has the best overall group of casters. But we're going to talk about the development over the course of 2016 that I really think helped the CSGO casters reach the next level. And then the array of factors surrounding how CSGO operates as an esport that allows them the maximum amount of freedom and also the ability to develop much greater and deeper synergy with each other, which I think really does elevate their casting to the next level. So without further ado, let me take a sip of my tea and we'll get into it. So at a basic level, when I think about casting, I consider three sort of primary qualities. So number one is that a caster needs to be technically proficient in the skills of casting. And what I mean by technically proficient, I'm talking about vocal inflection, camera presence, diction, vocabulary, all of these factors that are about the casting technique, the method of using your voice to broadcast, to deliver excitement, to hit punchy points and make them resonate and stick with the audience. So technique is one part of the casting triad, let's say. The second point is game ability. So the ability for a caster to discuss the game. Now, with play-by-play casters, obviously, this might be the technique of relaying information within a team fight in a MOBA, or dictating the action that's happening on screen in an exciting and comprehensive way so that it helps people follow the most important point of the action, no matter what that is, and instantly call out what the big play is going to be and do a good job of summarizing that for the audience. Because frequently in esports, there are many, many things going on. And while in traditional sports, we can usually watch the ball and have the ball be the focal point, it's actually the caster in League of Legends or in Dota or in Counter-Strike that is focusing the audience's attention, because there isn't necessarily that one thing that you're looking at when 10 people are on the screen at the same time. Now, for analytic casters, obviously, this is an ability to succinctly break down the information that is happening in the game and describe it in a way for the viewer to easily understand complicated concepts and appreciate the level of strategy or the level of play that's in a game. So simply saying something was good wasn't enough. You have to talk about why it was good, and in a way that the maximum amount of people can understand it and appreciate the brilliance of the players. So the third one is entertainment. And this is sort of the third leg of the stool, which means that you do need all three to have the most solid foundation for an esports group of broadcasters, or even as an individual broadcaster. And when I say entertainment, I mean there's a certain level of value to being able to hype up the audience during a match, but I think a lot of casters even who don't have many other skills, will have this quality ability to get excited and yell and everything like that. With entertainment, I really mean the higher levels of entertainment are the ability to create tension, storylines, drama within the broadcast, and to have a personality that really shows itself and is aggressive in its presentation, as in you can create a persona for the broadcast that is easy to bounce off of and interact with and tease and make fun of, etc., during the broadcast, which I think is underrated by a lot of different casters, and especially I think in League of Legends. But we'll get to that in a little bit. And is also the scariest in a lot of ways, because as soon as you put yourself out there in terms of entertainment, or you take a strong opinion for the sake of entertainment, then a lot of times that creates very negative reactions from portions of the fan base who may not like you talking about their favorite team in this way, even if you're only doing it for a joke and it's very clear that it's a joke. Not many. There are a lot of people out there who can't take jokes very well. So this is the hardest one, because even though most people might enjoy it, the vast majority of people often frequently enjoy it, there will be a very vocal community of people who will try and tear you down afterwards for whatever it is that you said, even if it was purely for comedic reason. So let's get into the Counter-Strike world and what's been going on. So starting in 2015 and 2016, I would have said that there was a lot of entertainment from the Counter-Strike casters, but sometimes there was line crossing as well, that things ended up not being so funny that were intended to be funny. They were sort of edgy for edgy's sake. Of course, I think this probably peaked with Richard Lewis's interesting time at DreamHack, where I think he went over the line and it resulted in some very weird stuff that I think he's dialed way back from, and it's in a much better place right now. And the other thing that I think a lot of the CSGO casters were lacking was a lot of technique from more professional broadcast experience. So we had, for example, the rise of Turner and E-League. And I think that E-League, and the fact that Turner was running it, and they were running NBA games, and they were running inside the NBA, which is a famous, very bantery show that happens about the National Basketball League in America, led them to sort of really work with the casters that they selected to be on E-League, which is most of the primary casters that we see in Counter-Strike. And I think that being in that environment really did hone the skills of a lot of these casters who were used to sort of only esports events. And I think the same thing happened with League of Legends casters, and I know I found it rewarding for my career to work with a lot of the Riot producers, because there are guys at Riot like Ariel Horn, who's the executive producer, who has produced the Olympics and won Emmy Awards. And these guys are very good at helping you be better on the broadcast. Now, sometimes I think they go overboard, but we'll talk about that a little. But with Counter-Strike, because the product from TBS was already relatively edgy, and they were pushing that with their own NBA content, it wasn't really sanding the edges off the Counter-Strike. It was more just refining those points so that they were still edgy, but they weren't necessarily as potentially offensive, I would say. Because there were people in there that have had public issues in the past, whether you agree they deserved them or not. Guys like Thorin and Richard Lewis have faced public backlash at times, most of which I think is undeserved. But it's lessened significantly over the course of the last couple of years. And I think that this level of production really did key them into better timing for throws, making their points more pithy and short, right? Pithy, and you contain them within the analyst desk in a short period of time, and also encourage their banter around those analytic points. And that's what we saw very frequently on the E-League analyst desk. I also really like the way that the casters and the desk could banter back and forth. So I think this created a lot of camaraderie and storylines around the E-League broadcast that then rippled out into a lot of the other Counter-Strike broadcasts, whether they were by ESL or MLG or Faceit or anything from around the world. I think that the development that happened at Turner and the difference that I saw from when E-League started in the casting to where it is right now is actually rather massive. And so I'm tempted to believe that that is where a lot of this development happened. So you see a better technique from the casters. They are more able to quickly work within the scope of a professional broadcast, in addition to having good speaking skills, good diction, everything like that. And you already know the analysis was always good. That wasn't ever really part of the problem, I think, with CS:GO. But if anything, it got a little more easy to access. Could be partially because I was learning more about the game over that period of time, so I was more keyed in on what they were saying. Possible that my own cloud of ignorance was receding as well when I was watching, but I do think that it's probably a combination of both of those things. And the entertainment was really there. And this is what I think is the hardest to really nail, because the other two things you can train by speaking to yourself in a mirror to improve your technique, or watching broadcasts. And certainly you can hone your skills of entertainment by watching stand-up comedians or people who do that kind of live comedy or that kind of live performance that is demanded of casters, because we don't have time to script or anything that we do really. So, but it's a lot of practice to see where a joke is going to fall flat, what is not enough, what is too far. And I think that that entertainment was really given wings with E-League because they weren't afraid to take risks. And that really suited the style of guys like Richard Lewis and Thorin and Moses. And not only that, but there was a continuity to the analyst desks that took place and continue to take place within the world of CSGO. Certainly, you have variation between those desks, and from event to event, it'll be mostly the same people, but obviously, some people want a vacation here, so they're not going to go on to this specific event. But a lot of the time, we see one of the two very good hosts for CSGO, Richard Lewis or Machine, who are doing most of the events right now. We see Thorin, we see YNK, who has become, I thought he was actually quite boring at first, but he's actually become one of my favorite guys to watch, especially on the Telestrator, because of how succinct and precise his analysis is and how well he can break down map movement. So I really love watching him these days. And he's upped his level of banter. He's not at the same level of guys like Thorin, obviously, but they bring different things to an analyst. Like guys like Moses, that have become these staples of the Counter-Strike Go casting community. And these guys, and the way that Counter-Strike works, and I think part of this is they have an older, more mature audience that is better able to take jokes and banter. But you'll notice that so much of CSGO, the CSGO desks, you can tell that they just really enjoy being with each other and talking with each other about the game. And when they take a shot at them, it's in jest, and it's very obvious that it's meant in a friendly manner. And not only that, but when you have consistent desks with the same group of people over a course of a tournament, or the same group of people over the course of several events around the world, they're going to be able to have continuous storylines and continuous synergy. And they're going to be able to make fun of each other for things that happened at different events in the past. Or they'll have a running total of predictions that they can reference among each other and banter about while on the desk. And this is actually one of the things that we see a lot in traditional sports. You might have occasional guests on shows, but for the most part, sports shows that are based around analysis and banter have the same group of people because that synergy is important. Just like in most traditional sports, you see the same group of guys who are casters together, and they cast together for usually many years, because that level of synergy is very important. The trust, the comfort, and that comes across to the viewers too. It's more fun as a viewer when you feel like the casters, you're a buddy with the casters, that you're just listening. It'd be like you're listening to two guys get excited about the game on the couch next to you. And I think that that level of authenticity is something that's very valuable to esports fans and to the esports community. So these factors, because they always have the same core group of people with certain guests. Of course, we see ex-pro players like Sponge coming in who are great, very fun to watch. So it's not there's enough mix to make it continuously entertaining. But at the same time, the core is still there. There's always going to be those one or two guys that you know are going to be on the analyst desk, or at least two of the people that you expect to see who can have that banter, that those references to other games, who can basically know what exactly the style of that other guy is and can play off of it well, make fun of it, and have a good time. And likewise in CSGO, one of the things that is very smart that's been allowed to happen has been that the casting pairs have mostly stayed the same. And if we talk about casters in CSGO, there's three pairs of casters that we see at basically every major, which are Anders and Semler, Sadikist and Henry G, and Bardolph and DDK. So these guys are all great in their own rights, and right has been celebrated across the community. But with each of these pairs, one of the reasons why they are so fun to listen to is because they have now a few years of experience under their belt working together consistently. And I can tell you that from my own career, I found it incredibly rewarding to have Doa as my primary broadcast partner, because it creates a synergy that cannot be duplicated if you're constantly trying to switch casting partners. You know what the other guy, how the other guy's going to react to something. You know when a joke's going to take off with them, or how to riff off of each other, or how to balance the play-by-play and analysis in a way that even when I work with other very skilled casters, it's not the same. And it's not the same for me, and it's not the same for the audience. You have to put in the time to build that synergy. And I think what League of Legends really lacks is that Riot is constantly swapping all these casting pairs, and I don't really understand why they do it. There's a reason why that doesn't happen in traditional sports, partially because many of these casting duos work for different networks that say cover the NFL. That's true. But also part of it is that you could have a rotation of casters, but usually it's the same couple of guys for casting a match. And that synergy is incredibly important. And it's something that is, I think, essential to a good viewing experience, or to the best, not a good viewing experience. Good casters can work with each, but to the best viewing experience. And I don't really understand why Riot is so insistent on flipping up all these pairs, especially for their international events. I also don't understand why, unlike why CSGO, there's always like duos pretty much, and you rarely see those kind of tri-casts. I can't even think of one off the top of my head. But in LoL, the synergy is kind of misbalanced, because at international events, they insist on doing tri-casts. And personally, I feel that tri-casting is actually the best method to do League of Legends, with one play-by-play and two analysts, because there's a lot of game time available. A game can last 45 minutes, an hour, and there could be a lot of downtime. And having two analysts to bounce ideas off each other and debate, or joke around with the play-by-play, is more entertaining in my experience. And I personally believe from doing tricasts that in a long enough timeline that tricasting should be a good solution for LoL. I don't have experience with that in CSGO, so I won't venture an opinion there. And my experience at Overwatch is there just isn't time for a tricast, so I would be reluctant to work with that. And I've heard tricasts in Overwatch, and they haven't been great. Also, Dota could do tricasts ostensibly for the same reason as League of Legends. Longer games, some amount of downtime where it's simply more entertaining to have those three guys. But as part of the synergy, I don't understand why. One of the things that I think affects League of Legends casting is that they have these two different formats for casters, depending on whether it's a domestic event or an international event. And not only that, but they're bringing people together from all over the world, and then mixing up all the casting pairs and constantly mixing up the desk as well, which I think doesn't have a lot of value for fans. And I think that the best reception of analyst desk content was in the season 3 World Championship, when the roster, including me, on the desk itself was relatively static, but we could have continuous storylines and banter and reference each other's predictions or things we said earlier on the desk, which made it a more compelling through line experience throughout the entire broadcast. So when I look at Dota 2 and I watch Dota 2 broadcasts, I find that when we look at their casters, there's a lot of work to be done. I think the top level Dota 2 casters are excellent, and I've enjoyed my conversations with them in the past. But I think that Dota 2 falls into a trap because they Dota 2 is sort of insular, and I find strange as a community because they seem so hostile to outsiders. I think out of all the major esports, Dota 2 is just incredibly hostile to people who may not know very much about the game, and I don't really understand why. But because of this attitude of the community, I often feel that the Dota 2 casters are lacking the ability to explain things in a way that everybody can understand. And I oftentimes get very confused watching Dota 2 broadcasts because I feel like the analysts, when it comes to their gameplay experience, don't really translate that into they get lazy and they will rely on language that the Dota 2 community will understand, but the layperson can't. And sometimes you have to do that for the sake of time and because you don't want to patronize your audience. But I think that the most skilled casters can always find a way to describe it where a competitive gamer from any esport should be able to grasp the overall concepts. And I feel that sometimes that's lacking when not always, just sometimes. I also think that out of the broad pool of Dota casters, they haven't had enough time to get necessarily all the technical chops down. Again, at the high end, you find very good technique, but a lot of the Dota 2 casts I watch, sometimes I get turned off by the fact that the casters simply don't have very good vocal training or ability to speak fluidly, and so the technique is lackluster, even if the quality of the analysis might be quite good if you know Dota. But again, those people usually fall into the trap of casting to a very advanced audience only and never really following a path of speech that will allow them to cater to both audiences simultaneously in as much as that is possible. Now, from the entertainment side, I actually find many of the Dota casters to be highly entertaining. In fact, part of what I love about watching the international is how much fun everybody seems to be having and the irreverence that the analyst desk has and the fun that they have with the players on stage. So I think that's actually one of the high points of Dota 2 is that you can really feel how much people love it. And they do silly stuff. It's a lot of tongue in cheek. It's a video game at the end of the day, and it's not taken too seriously. Now, I also want to talk about League of Legends more. So, I think a couple years ago, League of Legends was in a wonderful place. Uh, I think that when we look at the era of League of Legends that had people like Joe Miller and D-Man still in the scene, where the casting crew as a whole was a lot smaller, which I think was actually a good thing. If anything, I think the League of Legends casting talent that's employed by Riot has become quite bloated over time, unnecessarily so, and that has resulted in, at major international events, Riot feeling like they need to jam everybody who is a Riot employee into a broadcast at some point in time, which is also, again, not really how entertainment industries work. Usually, if there's you just get the best people to go to those broadcasts or go be on that movie. You don't put everybody you've got in there and think it's going to be a good product. It's like taking everything in your kitchen. You might use one spice for one thing and make a really good meal, but you're not going to take all your fucking spices and dump them into the same meal, right? They should be selected more judiciously. And some spices go with, like salt and pepper, go with basically everything and are the staples. So that's an analogy for you. But I think that Riot Part of this is because I mean, it's very obvious that I disagree with their entire system of having salaried casters because I think it sets this expectation up within the company. And I also think that Riot really enjoys sort of setting its casters against each other to prevent them from collective bargaining. And the easiest way to do this is to do what they do, which is have everybody show up to an event and say, well, we don't know what your assignments are. It's all depending on performance, even though they have hundreds of hours of broadcasts of every single caster's performance and are perfectly capable, aware rather, of what their capabilities are. So it's pretty much bullshit. Um, so I think that, and also I think that's probably one of the reasons why they rotate casters a lot, because if two casters had a lot of synergy together and were constantly casting, that would lead to their ability to block negotiate, and potentially Riot would lose two casters instead of just one if negotiations didn't go in Riot's favor. So I actually think that this is kind of Riot is lessening the potential quality of their own broadcasts from being greedy when it comes to business, which, if you know Riot and their actions over the years, should not really come as a major surprise to many of you, but I think is unfortunately really handcuffing their talent and limiting the top quality of their product. But what Riot did really well, and I think when Riot was on top, this showed, is that they offered a lot of support to their casters to increase technique. First off, hired producers who are really well seasoned and experienced in terms of television. And second off, they provided a lot of resources to their casters. I've talked about this before, but with Deficio, they were willing to hire a language trainer to help him with his Danish accent and English, which has been all but eliminated now. If you watch VODs of him now versus 2 years ago, the difference is night and day. His technique and his the way he sounds on broadcast is vastly superior as a result of his hard work and the resources which Riot made available to him. In North America, they frequently did work with improv, etc., to just get more of the technique down. And at the start, there was heavy teleprompter usage, but that has dipped drastically over time as casters have become more comfortable. I would argue is maybe never necessary in the first place to the degree they did it, but there is no doubt that it really helped set up and train a lot of these casters to be more professional on camera talent. And indeed, a lot of the work that I did with Riot was very beneficial to my career as well. Even though I work with OGN, which is a professional television station, there are many differences, which I'm not going to go into now, between working with OGN and working with American broadcasting, as I've done for Riot and other companies. So I think that these were all great things that Riot did, and they really did escalate the level of expectation and the minimum bar with which big casters could aspire to. And it made everybody sound a lot more polished and professional on their broadcast. So they had that going for them in a big way. Riot also continues to have excellent analysts and play-by-play commentators. Definitely bring the hype. A lot of the Riot casters are very good about reviewing each other, critiquing each other's work. And to this day, a lot of the league analysts are absolutely excellent at explaining strategies on the fly. Jat's teamfight breakdowns are awesome content where he really is top tier at making sure you understand and appreciate everything that goes on in a specific team fight in League of Legends. Now, it's not on the cast, it's shoulder content, but it is really good shoulder. And not only that, but you see the play-by-play casters constantly bringing the hype. I would, for my taste personally, I think sometimes you don't yell all the time during regular season games, especially ones that don't really matter. You don't have to cast everything like it's the fucking World Championship final, right? Because it sort of grates on the ear after time, and you know it's not important, and they seem like they're getting too excited about it. Well, how do I know when to be excited in the future? It doesn't happen all the time, but it does. Sometimes that frustrates me about some of the casters. Whereas if we look at Counter-Strike, I always feel like there's a proper escalation of hype. In group stage, things get exciting, but there's more banter between the casters. But as you go deeper into the playoffs, like, you get really epic calls where if you if you translate those same calls, great calls that are made by the CS:GO casters from the playoffs, you really won't see the same level of hype because they're much more aware of how you build up the storyline and the hype around that tournament. So I don't always like that about the play-by-play with League of Legends. And then when we look at the entertainment side, this is what is really problematic in League. And part of this is because, again, a lot of entertainment is based off of synergy from people working together, which is way more stable in Counter-Strike because Valve doesn't really do anything to control the talent in the game. All the tournament organizers just hire all the popular people who do good work, and those popular people negotiate as units, right? Anders and Semler negotiate together. We've seen some of the desk members negotiate together in the past or threaten to negotiate together if one of them is not on the desk or part of the broadcast. And one of the factors with entertainment is I think that Riot has intentionally, for whatever reason, and I don't really understand, uh, toned down predictions. But predictions are so fun because they're not about getting it right or getting it wrong. It's about hearing somebody's analysis or ideas or thoughts about why a matchup will go a certain way. And it's interesting to compare what you thought before with what you see and talk about the faults or make fun of each other or banter. It's incredibly fun. And the viewers love seeing that. I can just tell you that people love on social media shitting on me when I'm wrong, even though I've had an incredibly high rate of predictions in League of Legends over the World Championships over the years. But Riot doesn't really encourage that, and there's no through line. There was in season 3, but ever since then they dropped it. Part of this is because they keep they're just like the desk. I think is just a mess right now. I think Dash is a wonderful host, and I think there are a lot of good people on the desk. But I mean, it's a mess in that there's no consistency. It's just like everybody changes all the time. And now in the NALCS, even for the regular season, they're like, isn't a desk? I don't know. It's two people standing there talking a lot of the time, which in my mind is a huge downgrade because when you have like a host and then one analyst, it's basically like the host asking questions or driving the conversation in one person's opinion, which I just find incredibly boring from an entertainment perspective. Yeah, it can be informative, but it's so dry, right? It's so dry. And when you have multiple people and multiple viewpoints, and you're actually forced to put your opinion out there, even if you think it's 51%, 49%, you have to come down on one side. And there has to be a reason that makes you come down just a little bit over the top. And that's really, I think, what's interesting and what the best desks and what Counter-Strike frequently does very well when it comes to predictions. And I don't see that level of skill of banter on a desk and creating interesting dialogue on a desk in any other esport these days, which I think is really disappointing, but it's also the hardest thing to get right without offending a lot of people or crossing over a line or being too timid, because it goes the other way too. If people are not good at expressing themselves or defending their opinions, those desks get super boring. So League has this issue now where they've just dialed it back. And even I had problems when I was working with Riot where I had bits that I sometimes wanted to do on the analyst desk where they would kill it. They would say, no, you can't do that. And I didn't think that, I never really suggested anything that I think was even anywhere close to over the line. But because of Riot's sensitivity to that and the producer's sensitivity, they don't push the envelope in the same way that the people at Turner do for TBS, right? There isn't anything that's been made in League that is comparable to inside the NBA. And it feels like a very different environment. But by putting the kid gloves on, I really think that the desk has just like gone downhill at Riot, and the entertainment value has plummeted because you never even know. Nobody's willing to put their opinion out there, and whether that's Riot or whether it's the casters who are afraid of social media backlash, I'm not really sure. But it has gotten, in my opinion, duller over time from that perspective. And I'd like to see more consistency in the kind of content that Riot creates. And I think that a way for them to level their entertainment up is to really push the casters to be more creative themselves about how they deliver content within these analyst segments, and open them up to just be aware that sometimes there are growing pains in this process. I think we saw it in Counter-Strike, where people, while they test those limits, are going to make mistakes and they're going to go too far. I've made mistakes on SI going too far. I had to learn. But it's not something that it's something you have to learn by doing, because it's different for every person. For some people's personalities, they can just go farther. Thorin can go farther because people are expect that of him, and because it's his personality and they're more forgiving than other people can within this industry. So the limits really change. And also, people have to figure out how they are entertaining and where those strengths lie. And I think that's a lot of unexplored territory for many of the League of Legends casters who have been so afraid to put their own opinions out there or to put themselves on the line. I do think that there are exceptions to this, obviously. I think some of the League casters are great entertainers. One person who I think has been doing a great job has been Dash. He's been a wonderful desk host, and we see him at events like All Stars really just like going crazy and having a good time. And he's become one of the most, I think, entertaining League personalities out there. If we talk about those three, like the three legs to the casting stool that we were talking about earlier. So I think it's there, but I think that the lid has been put on either by the casters themselves or by Riot, where they're not really able to reach the same levels of fun and entertainment as the CSGO casters, because of these restrictions, or because of the lack of synergy, because it's super hard to get reads on other people if you're constantly switching your casting partner or constantly switching people on a desk. Now, I think one of the faults of CSGO is when you maintain the entire same desk, like we saw at the E-League Major. I was talking to Thorne about it, and it's exhausting, right? You can't necessarily expect everybody to work after every single game for a week or 2 week long event. That's like a nuts workload. Casters obviously aren't on every game too, but you exhaust the talent at that point, and they're not going to give you the best work. So having some sort of rotation, I think, is smart. But I think that the best kind of events, if you want to have a running through line of predictions, is just get the predictions from the guys who aren't on the desk at the time, put them on the screen in a graphic so that 6 guys' predictions are on the screen before every match. And if that guy's not there to defend it, it's kind of whatever. You just have the 3 or 4 guys who are there on the desk to talk about those predictions. And then if one guy got it horrendously wrong or had a big upset, next time he rotates onto the desk when he's talking about that team. Or maybe they just create, after the game is over, they swap out to do post-match analysis, and that guy's there to talk about his prediction later on. There's ways to do it that are more interesting and more dynamic. And I think that's one thing Counter-Strike goes too far on, I think, is they overwork people to the degree where they're not able to give 100% of themselves because of the level of demand. Whereas Riot has been very good about toning it back or making sure that nobody's working too hard, at least these days. I mean, I was on every single game after, during Season 3 Worlds, and that was pretty hard, honestly. But it was also, the matches were more spread out than they were during a major. Like, one day at a major is absolutely crazy. So I think that that's one thing that CSGO in particular could really use a change on, and I think that that will be enforced by the talent in the future when it comes to how they look at being hired by these events and what is a reasonable workload, because being on camera for 12 hours is not reasonable. You're going to say something you're going to be unhappy with your performance, or say something you regret if you do that, I think. I don't know enough about Dota 2 to really reflect on that on the workload aspect of it, but I plan to kind of have more conversations in the future with some of the Dota 2 casters to get more insight into that. So anyway, I hope that the CSGO community listens to this and understands that you guys have I think as a whole, when we talk about not only the primary casters that I've talked about, but people like Pansy, who's wonderful, and Blue, and of course many other people that I haven't named. But if you look at the entire set of casters that you guys have for CS:GO, I think you have the most complete unit of talent. And I think a lot of this is because they are free to do what they want and they are accountable only to themselves and to you guys, the fans. They're not beholden to a company like Riot Games. Valve is very much they for the I mean obviously in Dota they've banned some people like Too Good, but for the most part they're pretty laissez-faire when it comes to how their talent operates, and they don't really force, as I understand it, tournament organizers to hire or use specific people or include X number of people in a particular broadcast. It is much more on the talent to negotiate that and to bring you the best possible product. It also means that they're free from the shackles of worrying about what Valve thinks for the most part, unless probably it was a very extreme example. But it opens up them to push the limits, to figure out what works for them as casters, to develop long term synergy that increases the level of entertainment that you receive. And the technique is now there due to enough rote practice and partnerships with very professional broadcasting organizations that I think have leveled up the caster's technique. You guys should be damn grateful. And Semler is a wonderful caster that is very well respected among his peers. So be happy you have him and be happy you have the wealth of talent you do have, because I, for one, love it.